I decided tonight, instead of doing a typical presentation and talk to you about legalese and licensing and throw a bunch of terms at you, I thought tonight it might be a little bit more beneficial to actually have you work through an exercise. Because if you are interested in doing licensing, there are steps that you need to take before you head down that path. And a lot of it is getting to know yourself, your product, where you want to license it, how you want to license it, who you want to license with. So each of you should have received, when you came in, a worksheet. If you did not receive one, there's some more down. Okay, so what you have is what I'm considering a pre-checklist. This is not all-inclusive. This is not everything that you need to know. This is just a brief snapshot to get you started. If we were going to go through the entire exercise of what it's going to take to license your product, there'd be about 6 more pages attached to this. But I just want to give you a little bit of a tease, a little bit of starting point for you to think about, okay? So hopefully you've got your pencils sharpened or your pens ready. And again, Andrew and I didn't discuss this in advance, but because he did such a great job, I'm going to leave this up. And we're going to go through this as we talk about what's going to go on your form. So on the checklist, the very first thing you see is type of product. What I want you to do is describe in your own words, what is your product? What is it that you intend to license or manufacture or produce? Okay? In this case, it's obvious. It's the Trio. In this example, I wouldn't put Trio. I would say a hygiene system to offer a wet wipe in conjunction with any ordinary toilet paper on a roll holder or something like that. Whatever it fits for your product description. Okay? The product description, that's where I probably go in a little bit more detail. What is it? Why do you need it? What is it going to do? What problem is it going to solve? That's what you would put in your product description. Andrew did a great example here of what the next portion on this checklist is, which is concept type. Okay? On this checklist, you've got 2 boxes here. One is a single product concept, one is an accessory product capabilities. When you're thinking about what your product is, what it can do, what problems it solves, where you're going to sell it, how you're going to sell it, who you're going to license it with, I want you to expand the possibilities for what your product is and what it does. In this case, Andrew did a great job because in his samples, he talked about not only having the wipe itself, he offers 2 ways in which to sell and offer the wipe. He's got the container itself that fits onto the device. And in a previous iteration, I know that he talked about having a little compartment that would fit an air freshener. Likely most of you need an air freshener in your bathroom. So it seems like a very good accessory. The reason those types of things are important is because when it comes to licensing the product and looking at, and we'll go into more detail about this later, is how you're going to market, how you're going to sell it, and how you're going to make royalties off of that. Because each one of these is an opportunity to make money. Each one of these is an opportunity to make money in different market segments as well. So you need to think outside the box, per se, as you think about what your product is and what opportunities you have. What I call that is monetizing and maximizing your intellectual property. Okay? Before you get too far down that road, as you heard Andrew talk about the difference between a provisional patent and a non-provisional patent. In some cases, you'll start with the provisional, which is the first step, and then you'll move into the non-provisional phase. Before you reach a licensing deal, you need to understand what your intellectual property portfolio consists of. And it's not just patents. It's trademarks, it's copyrights. Those are the key essential parts that you're going to consider in a licensing deal. In certain cases, there may be trade secrets, but we're not going to go down into that level of detail today. But if I were to ask Andrew, what is in your intellectual property portfolio? As he discussed, he's got design patents, he's got utility patents, he's got some trademarks. He may, in fact, have copyrights if he's got a video on his website illustrating per se how the product works. He may have an instruction manual. I'm not sure if you need one for this type of product, but let's assume that it's possible. That you do, okay. That in fact may potentially carry some copyrightable materials. So on your form, I've given you quite a few sections here to itemize what your intellectual property portfolio consists of. You may not have all of these today, but they are things that at some point you will need to document, itemize, and have listed and known, including what status they're in, who helped prepare them, and that's a big differentiator, right? If you think that you can do it all yourself, I'm here to tell you you cannot. Andrew will tell you you cannot, right? When you talk about moving and pursuing a licensing deal, in certain cases that may be very important to the partner that you're going to work with, because they're going to want to know what protections you've secured thus far, how far you are in those process, and how protectable those things are. And if you have tried the do-it-yourself route, there may be some issues in any one of those areas. So on the back part of page 1, what you have there is just a quick, okay, so I've got all this intellectual property now, or I plan to have this intellectual property, and what is it that I intend to license? Typically, it'll be all of those things that you've accumulated around development of your product, or at least the concept of your product. Once you've kind of got all this down, and there's a lot more, but again, this is a very basic step for you to get started. You got to start thinking about who your licensees are. In Andrew's case, he said, you know what, right now I'm not really interested in going down the licensing route, but he talked about a couple of big companies, Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, Kimberly-Clark, just to name a couple of those. Those are all potential licensees for his product, should he decide to go down that route. Picking one, or determining the best one, or determining which of the three, if not all of the three that he'll work with, is an exercise that he'll need to do, and is also an exercise that you'll need to do. This form takes you through a little bit of that process, because you need to know who your prospective licensees are for your particular product, in the product category, in the consumer and or commercial space that you're going to attempt to sell your product into. And so you're going to need to do some research. You could certainly hire a broker who will act as a middleman. There are plenty of them, and there are international companies that do this. If you go to Licensing Expo in Las Vegas, which is once a year, the place is filled with brokers and folks who will help you work to identify potential licensees for your product. I'm actually working right now on an international deal with one of those companies. But you still have to know what your plans and your intents are. They can't do necessarily everything for you. So you've got to come up with some framework, some guide rails, if you will. So to determine who those product licensees are, again, you can go through the broker, or you can do some of the legwork on your own. As I've indicated in instructions before, one of the most simple and easiest ways to do that is to go to where you think your product will be sold. Where are people going to get their hands on it? If it's at Home Depot, if it's at Walmart, if it's in a grocery store, if it's wherever it is, go to that space. Look on those shelves. Look at where you envision your product will end up in that market space, and pull products around it. Pull products that either fit in the same category. Maybe they're supplemental, as someone here mentioned when Andrew was talking about going into nursing homes. Hey, I've got a guy that sells diapers in the nursing homes. Hey, I got a guy that can do this. Those are all supplemental product category items. And so even if, by chance, your product is the only one out there and it's never been on the market before, so where in the possibly would it fit, or where would you go to see it on the product shelves? Look for those other complementary product categories, and that might give you some information. And you do that because any product packaging has some general information about whether it's manufactured, who may have been the distributor, where it's distributed. It may have some patent information on there. It'll certainly have trademark information on there, which is a first step to helping you do some preliminary research. If it's someone like a Procter & Gamble or Johnson & Johnson, some of that very basic information is right on any one of their product packaging. Then you can use that information to go onto Google, do an internet research, get some basic information, find out how and if they accept licensing requests. They may tell you who to partner with or who to get in touch with, because they may say, you know, we only work with certain partners to do that and not necessarily you on an individual basis. But a lot of the information you can find out directly. It's not that hard. If you do decide to go the route of a broker, understand that that is going to cost you money, either as part of the advance towards future royalties, as a percentage of your royalty rate. And we'll talk about a little bit how royalty rates are calculated and captured and some of the things that also cut into that. But we're not going to get into a ton of detail, because everyone says, well, what royalty rate can I expect from my product? There's no standard royalty rate, not in any one product category. There are ranges, and they vary. If you want some basic information about ranges, there's a really good resource online. I'm drawing a blank right now as to what the actual website link is, but I will get it and post it. But basically, it's an organization that does a lot of research around what licensing deals have recently been signed, what royalty percentages were paid against those license agreements. And they'll give you some general information. They'll have things broken down by industry. So you'll have some idea of where you think your product might fit based on its potential in its category. So on page 2, when we talk about prospective licensee, once you've got an idea of who that licensee is, you know, I'm asking you to write it down. Tell me who they are, what they do. Are they a manufacturer? Are they a distributor? Are they a reseller? Or are they going to do all of the above? When you talk about a licensing deal, there are lots of ways to slice and dice that pie. Not any one licensee may be the only one you partner with. In fact, you may choose to partner with several, and each of them may do one or multiple parts of getting your product from concept through to commercialization. So you need to dig a little bit and understand what aspects of the deal that they will and can be responsible for and actually maximize. You also want to find out, where do they play in this product area? Certainly, you don't necessarily want to partner with a licensee that has never been in that game before, has never been in that market before, or doesn't have any experience, because that is going to delay time to market for you. It's going to delay the time in which you will begin to see royalties come from the commercialization of your product. If they've got a learning curve, you don't want to necessarily be part of that learning curve. So look for somebody who's experienced in the product category that you're seeking. You want to also find out if they've had other licensing deals and how they've been successful and who have they licensed deals with. You also, again, they may be successful in one product category, but not necessarily in yours. In any case, you don't want to be their first crush, their first love, or the first person that you marry in terms of a licensing deal. You want to talk about, what do you expect from this relationship? How many of you are married? How many are divorced? A few. I'm one of those. Missed one? What? Deceased? I'm sorry for that. Well, hopefully you won't have that issue here, but unfortunately, in terms of any deal, any contractual obligation, there's always an end. Generally, it's a natural expiration or termination of the agreement. Everybody's fulfilled their obligations. Whatever promises that they made when they signed up, they're all fulfilled. Everybody's happy, but you know, it's run its course. It's time to move on. It's going to expire. Termination is generally, hey, something's not right. Someone's not keeping up their end of the bargain. Something isn't working out. We didn't plan for something to happen. We don't have a way to fix it. You know, those are situations in which termination happens. And unfortunately, before you enter a license agreement, you have to know how you're going to get out of it. So, you know, my analogy is essentially plan for your prenup, plan for what your expectations are while you're married, and plan for divorce day, and however that may occur. So you need to kind of think through those things, write those down. When you talk to your licensee about how do they currently manage licensing, their licensing program, they should have a licensing manager, a category manager, product manager who can talk through these things with you. They can talk about, do they pay quarterly, do they pay monthly, how do they reconcile, will they be the ones to conduct the audit, will you be the one to conduct the audit, will you use a third party to conduct audits. So you need to kind of go through and figure out, make sure and understand that they have a manageable licensing program. You certainly don't want, you're certainly not in a position to teach them, and you want to make sure that the program is consistent, it's stable, and it meets all of the requirements that the agreement that you sign with them are going to require. Does that make sense? Okay. Key, critical. Have they been in a situation with another potential licensor where there has been a dispute, whether that's dispute over somebody not paying their royalty rates, whether milestones weren't achieved, whether there were infringement claims, things were not protected as they should have been. Whatever the case may be, it's generally easy to find out, certainly if it's a public record, whether or not there's been any litigation or dispute. Even in the contract, there's a provision in the contract where, not to get too legalese on you, but, it's basically asking you, have you or do you knowingly are aware, basically, of any infringements, any lawsuits, or any disputes that might have an impact on what we're trying to do. And you want to make sure that you understand what those things are, because if they're in some sort of litigation that ties up their resources, even ties up their opportunity to go and work on your product and getting your product to commercialization, that's going to have a negative impact on you, ultimately, in one way, shape, or form. Okay? And then I've got on here, what is their support and what is their need for support for training on the product, know-how and access to information. So when you talk to a prospective licensee, one of the things I want you to keep in mind is why the patent information is on the first page. Is because when you do go talk to a potential licensee, you're not going to disclose anything and everything that you know and you've developed related to your product. You want to give them only so much information that is already afforded some level of protection. So generally, if you've sought a provisional patent, those things that you have already disclosed are the types of things that you're going to talk about and share and disclose. You're not going to get into the level of detail to, in Andrew's case, potentially talk about all the different specifics about materials or certifications or testing or programs that you've done. You can hang on to that and reserve that until you're further down the process. Only disclose and talk about the things that you've already sought protection around. Okay, and that's very important because I know there's a lot of concern, not only for people in this room, but it's in general in the inventors community. I don't want to say too much because I don't want them to steal my idea. That's why you don't go in full bore and open yourself up to that potential. In Andrew's particular case, having that product design there, could someone eventually or make some assumptions as to how to process and manufacture that? Possibly. But there may be some key elements of this that he hasn't disclosed and won't disclose until later in the process, okay? Which could be favorable to you and could impact any potential for counterfeiting or knockoff or the case may be. Now, when we talk about licensing, there are lots of pitfalls, but one of the biggest pitfalls is a simple word, and you've got to make sure you don't fall prey. Those are on your paper under license rights, the word exclusivity, and whether that's exclusive or non-exclusive. One's a monogamous marriage and there's nobody else in your life and everybody's happy and things are working great, then there's a monogamous, non-monogamous route, the polygamous route, I guess you could say, where the same thing is. Everybody's happy, we're in a lot of different relationships, everybody's doing their part, and we're all happy. The reason I say that is because you have to think about who these potential licensees are, where your product can be commercialized, what market space it can fit into, who's going to commercialize it, how they're going to commercialize it. In this particular example, and as part of the Q&A that happened here, Andrew and you guys already identified several potential market opportunities for this product. One licensee may not be able to hit all of those markets. They may be great in the consumer space and getting a product on a retail shelf. They may not be so great on the online aspect, or they might not be so great on the commercial aspect. So getting it into large distribution centers and opportunities in medical supply catalogs or in schools or whatever the case may be. So you want to make sure that you think about all the potential ways in which you can monetize and maximize your intellectual property. So when you're talking to a licensee and the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, I want exclusivity, take a breath and about 10 steps back. Because they need to justify to you, to your full and complete satisfaction, that they have the right to earn that exclusivity arrangement. Because the problem with exclusivity arrangements is you're essentially putting all your eggs in one basket. You're expecting that partner to do everything that they said they would do, hold up all of their obligations, meet all their milestones, pay on time, do on time, act on time 100% of the time. And a lot of times that doesn't happen. So you've got to build contingencies in place. And generally the contingencies up front are, in Andrew's case, he was talking about selling initially in North America. Why would he sign an international distributor? First, he may need to go seek additional patent protection in other countries. Okay? If the distributor doesn't distribute in all parts of the world, you can carve out certain geographic territories and regions so that they're only successful where they can be successful. Otherwise, you're losing an opportunity to potentially partner with another licensee who can take that product in another area, whether it's another market, consumer, commercial, medical, school, industrial, retail. All of those opportunities can be carved out. Okay? When we talk about that, the next part of that is under the license grant. So not putting all your eggs in one basket, giving yourself an opportunity to maximizing it with one or more licensees and one or more regions and one or more industries. But then you're also working through what are the specific components of the product are they going to be responsible for. So if you look at this list on the bottom under license grant, there are what are determined as divisible rights. So are they going to make it? Are they going to have it made? Meaning the differentiation there is, are they the manufacturer? Or are they going to outsource it? Who are they going to outsource it to? Where are they going to outsource it? You want to know those things. You want to control some of those distribution flows. You want to understand where your materials are going, how they're going to be used, whether they're going to be able to, in certain cases, your manufacturer, or excuse me, your licensee, may want a use right of their own to be able to use the product internally for reduced royalty rate, since they're not necessarily getting the additional monetary value of commercializing it. Are they going to be responsible for all of the marketing, the selling, the offer for sale, and the reselling? Are they going to be the ones getting it out into the market? Are they going to hire third-party distributors? Are they going to hire, what does that retail, what does that distribution chain look like? You need to know, again, which parts they're going to assume responsibility for as part of the whole commercialization chain. Import and export, again, are important because if you don't have the protections in certain countries, you probably don't want the product either imported if you're bringing it here or exporting if you're taking it there. Sub-licensing is another very dangerous term if you see that in a license agreement. If you're if your partner is asking for the opportunity and rights to sub-license, that's basically, you know, I own the car, I've let you borrow the car, and now I'm basically giving you the right to go loan that same car, my car, to whoever else, without me having any direct or necessarily control over who might be driving that car. Are they driving drunk? Are they texting while driving? Are they putting gas in it? Are they checking the tires? Are they carrying proper maintenance on it? How do I know, right? Similar to sub-licensing, you want to make sure that you have stringent controls over who has access to your product, your commercialization, your patents, and where they play in the chain. So be careful and be cautious if you see sub-licensing. On the next page, we talk about regions and territory, which I touched on a little bit. Make sure that you're partnering first with partners where in areas in which you have already sought protection or plan to seek protection, or have as part of your license agreement, a progressive plan to go out and seek protection in other countries or in other markets. And then identify the type of market. And when I say market, again, I'm going back to this example here. You know, commercial space, retail space, hygiene, what else could be applicable to this? Well, it could certainly fit in a part of this, at least, could fit in the air freshener segment if he chooses to add that feature on as well. So think about those as well. We're going to touch a little bit on royalty and payment, because that's the one that everybody's worried about and concerned about and thinks that that's where they're going to get rich from. Not necessarily so, but it's a great idea and a great vision and dream to have. But there are lots of ways in which your royalty is affected, and your royalty is basically your cut. What are you going to get once your product is sold? Okay? Again, if you're using a broker, that cut's going to be a little bit less. And any person involved in that supply chain or commercialization chain is going to get a little bit of a cut as well. So you got to make sure that you understand who all is going to get a piece of that pie, and make sure that your piece is as whole as it can be. And when you think about that, think about, and I've given some examples in the form, not all. Again, this is not a, and let me just say this, because I'm not going to be able to stress this enough. No licensing deal is a one-size-fits-all. Don't try to pull a license agreement off the internet. Don't try to do this yourself. Don't try to assume that you know exactly how you're going to get paid. Don't try to attempt to necessarily predefine your royalty rate until you've thought about a lot of these other factors, some of which I've given you in your form. If you look at the form, and I talk about structure of royalties or other license fees. Fully paid versus royalty free. That's essentially at what point and how are you going to get paid? Okay? Are you going to get paid up front? Are they going to pay you? Are there going to be advances involved? Is there going to be a royalty on unit? Is there going to be a royalty on sale? What type of sale? What type of receipt? We'll talk through a little bit of those. In some cases, you may be entitled to a one-time upfront advance or license fee. I would be a little cautious and skeptical when you see those. In certain cases, it definitely makes sense. In other cases, it may not. A lot of it is dependent on who your licensing partner is and what the intent is for that fee, and how they're going to use it, and or why they're going to pay you a one-time licensing fee, because it's going to take an incremental chunk out later, or it may delay the time in which you might see your next check from them. Periodic payment of license fees. Again, when you're talking to your licensee about their licensing program, when are you getting paid, and how often you're getting paid, and how often is that after the product has left their hands? Is it once it gets to the distribution centers? Is it once it lands on a retail shelf? You need to understand at what point in which you're going to expect to get paid, because you need to follow up on that. You need to stay on top of that, and you need to make sure that you have a method to audit that as well. Milestones. Milestones is an interesting one because if you talk about getting a product from concept to commercialization, it doesn't happen overnight. There are lots of little steps and variables that happen. So you can base out certain milestones and certain opportunities for which you might get a small incremental advance or payment on a licensing fee from your licensee. When I say that, I mean from the time you sign the agreement, how long do you have to wait until they've done whatever their first action is? In a case I'm currently, in an agreement I'm currently working on, we're working out something similar to this where in fact within 18 months of signing that agreement, we need to have a certain specified dollar amount of gross receipts paid. 18 months is about the average for the type of company, the type of product in the industry that this deal happens to be affecting, right? It may not be reasonable in all cases to start seeing payment within 18 months because it may take a lot longer to get that product commercialized, but you need to work through your licensee and understand that. And again, that's part of the whole program licensing structure, right? Other milestones may be, as you saw, Andrew had a couple of previous prototypes. If you're starting from scratch with a licensee, you may put a milestone for, I need to see a prototype by X date. We need to see second phase development prototype by X date. We may need to see focus groups by X date. We may need to see, first commercialized version of the product, whether you want to call it an alpha version, a beta version, whatever the case may be, by X date. And so you want to think about those types of things as you go through and structure your licensing deal as well. You want to think about patent activities. So depending on how far you are in your IP protection process, if you've managed to sign a licensing deal with a prospective partner and your patent actually hasn't been issued yet, for example, you may work out a deal as part of your license agreement where they help you in prosecuting that patent. Either they contribute funds towards that, they take over the assumption of making sure that patent gets issued, because again, it's in their best interest to make sure that if the deal is based on issuance of a patent, somebody's got to take the legwork and somebody's got to take responsibility for getting that through. If you're short on funds, you could work it into the deal where they'll assume some of that cost, but again, it's going to come back eventually out of your cut once you get to commercialization. So free money is not necessarily free money, regardless of how you get it and when you get it in a licensing deal. And then deductions for development activities. So creation of websites, creation of packaging, creation of product materials, whatever the case may be, there may be some deductions from the royalty rates for the efforts and work that they put in to help create and develop those materials for your product. Other marketing activities, social media development, web focus, bloggers, those types of things. If all of those are part of your market and commercialization plan, some of those funds, if they're paid for by the licensee, may come out of your cut or a percentage of your cut, or you exclude them out. Licensing deals and royalty rates and how much you're paid all take into consideration what you're willing to give and take in return for that. So also think about returns. How many of you ever returned something to a store that you didn't like? Probably everybody. Somebody's paying for that. Let's just hope it's not you as the licensor, okay? So you want to think about, how they're selling the product. If they're selling it in big truckload pallets to distributors, are they selling it in small box shipments to retail stores? What's the timeline for return? What's their return policy, and how does that affect your royalty rate? Because again, you don't want to take the brunt of all of the things that necessarily go into commercializing that product. You want to understand how it's going to affect your royalty rate, but not necessarily have those things incrementally deduct. So that big royalty check that you're waiting for has Not enough zeros on one side of the decimal, okay? And certainly not a negative anywhere, okay? Royalty rate calculations, those can be based off so many different ways. Some of the most common ones I've described here are quantity of sales, you know, how many items are actually sold, gross sales, net sales. Don't assume that what you think net sales means is the same thing that net sales means to them. Don't assume that what you think gross sales means to you is the same as it means to them. And certainly don't go to Google and look up gross sales. Ha! That's what it is. That's what I want. Make sure it's clearly understood what those terms mean to both you and your partner, because those are going to determine what your percentage from those proceeds will be as part of your royalty rate. Okay? We already touched a little bit on how often royalty payments will be made. An interesting thing is if you're using a broker, what the broker's going to go out, they're going to source, and they're going to find you potential licensee. You may direct it so that they go sign them up. They're responsible. They manage that. In other cases, you might want to own and assume that responsibility. That's the route I would tell you to go. That way you've got control over what's going on there. And in general, that will also have an impact on who's collecting the royalties as they're earned, right? So if the broker is collecting the royalty rates from distributor A, you've got an additional period of time in which you're going to expect to see your royalty. So based on whatever agreement is signed, you know, it could be paid net 30 after first sale or after sale of product. But then by the time the broker gets that deal, they manage their paperwork, they process their reports, they process the payment, they take their cut. That could be another 30, 60 days. So understand who's going to be responsible for collecting those payments, how they're going to collect those payments, and how quickly those payments are going to be made to you. Also think about that if the broker is in any way going to be responsible for collection of royalties, what happens if they don't get paid? Who's going to aid and assist in getting those royalties paid? Or are they going to throw up their hands and go, well, I'm sorry, I tried. I can't get them to pay. Somewhere, somebody's got to pay that broker. They're probably going to come after you because they're considering, for all other intents and purposes, the fact that their services have been rendered and they're performing. The fact that if they're not responsible for the agreement between them and the potential licensee on the street, if you will, they may feel, hey, I still get my cut, and have their hand out when in fact the royalties that were produced from that sale of product haven't even occurred yet. So think about that. Think about currency conversions and who's responsible for currency conversions when the product is not sold and payment isn't made in US dollars. There is a fee to convert money. Do not have that fee come out of your fee. Okay? How long will royalties be paid? That's an interesting question, and that's one of the many big sticklers in this deal I'm working on right now. Particularly if you're dealing with a broker. There's a variation there. Because they're not necessarily like a realtor. You hire a realtor, you tell them, you give them some guidelines, some guardrails around what kind of house you want to buy, how many bedrooms, you want a 1-story, 2-story, how many bathrooms, what area, what neighborhood, how much you want to pay. Then you're expecting that they're going to go and look for properties that meet your criteria, and they're going to bring you back a wish list that fits that criteria. You absolutely want to do that in any licensing deal. In this case, in a real estate deal, when does the realtor get paid? And do they get any money after that? So if you live in the house for 10 years, 20 years, and even when you go to sell your house, do they get any more money? That's not how a licensing deal works necessarily when it comes to brokering. So they're going to say, hey, thanks for telling me all about the type of house you want, where you want to live, how much you want to pay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're going to go out and they're going to find all those properties, licensees. They're going to come back, I have this great deal. It meets all the requirements that you asked for. I think you should move forward. You have whatever agreement you're going to have between them and you, and or them and you. Want dual party, tri-party, they get sticky. And there's no walking away at that point. They're going to want their cut for as long as that deal is in effect. And even in certain cases afterward, as long as there's a stream for royalties to continue to come in. Because in most of these types of deals, there's a little tail end, right? So product may still be sitting in warehouses. Product may still be sitting in production phase. So in certain cases, there may be an opportunity, even though the relationship's, ending down, it's dying down, there may still be an opportunity for some additional revenues to come in based on how much product is still in the distribution center waiting to be sold and or in manufacture. Again, this depends on what type of deal that you're structuring. You want to, however, think about what are they entitled to and how long are they entitled to that, and what are the terms and conditions for when they stop being entitled to that. Certainly, if they have not met their obligations and the contract needs to be terminated, why should they continue to obtain a cut from your sales of your product? Anyone think that they should? No. So you want to work out in ways in which that relationship is going to be severed and those payments or that cut of the royalty payment is going to be paid if you're working in a broker situation. If you're working direct deal, you and the potential licensee, there's some aspect of that still remains, but it's not as substantive as when you're dealing in a brokerage relationship and licensing. Let's see, we touched on all those. Breach, think about when I talked about when you go into one of these deals, what are going to be deal breakers for you? What are the causes in which you're no longer happy and you want to divorce and you want to walk away? You need to think about what your deal breaking points are as well. They'll be thinking about what theirs are and how that it's going to affect, again, getting rid of whatever products are in process of being manufactured, sitting in distribution warehouse shelves. In process of transit, there's a big truck of your stuff going down the street on its way to wherever it's going to go, or on a ship on its way to wherever it's going to end up. So you want to think about what are the terms that are going to upset me enough to make me want to walk away from this deal. Generally, an exclusive arrangement, those are really easy to identify. You've trusted this licensee to do all of these specified obligations and requirements, and they're not being met. You need to document those. You need to prove that they're not being met. There's a cure period in which you kind of go back and forth and you say, come on, we're not getting along. What's not happening? Why are you not paying me on time? It's not there are certain cases in which it'll be automatic, and in most cases it won't. There's a discussion. There's a drawn out little dispute period. But apart from that, you still need to understand what's your point for breaking the deal are going to be. Okay. And think about taxation. Who's going to be responsible for taxes? How they're going to be paid? Make sure that you understand all the jurisdictions. If it's a food product, there may be local city ordinances that have additional tax due on top of that. So make sure you understand how taxation and tax issues are going to affect your royalty rate. We're going to get into a little bit of obligations for commercialization, which is on the back page. Uh-huh. Yes, that's what I was talking about, those deal breakers. What are the things that are going to cause that deal to terminate? So not meeting milestones, not getting paid on time, infringing, those are some of the big ones. It makes it a lot harder because Right. Well, you have to say you were obligated to do this, this, and this. If you can't prove that that obligation exists, then you're going to have a little bit of a fight on your hands, right? Some of the easier ones, are bankruptcy, insolvency, assignment of creditors, those types of things. Those are all in the contract, but they're more obvious, right? But if you said, hey, you were supposed to have this product, first prototype built by X date, it's been 9 months and I haven't seen anything, and that whole 9 months period means that's another 9 months in which your product's not getting commercialized, which is another 9 months that you're not getting paid, that could be problematic. Is it a deal breaker? Probably not, unless it continually happens, right? So if they miss the first milestone, you can work in penalties, right? You can say, if you miss this milestone and you miss it by X number of days, you're going to pay me back 2% or whatever the case may be, or I'm going to withhold 2%. But if they continually miss those and keep missing those marks and keep missing those obligations, then you've got a problem, okay? So on that last page are just some of those milestones that I was just getting into. So, for prototype, for market test, for regulatory clearance. In certain cases, your product may have to have certain certifications or clearances in order to be sold. So make sure that you also understand that and that your prospective licensee understands that and has the capacity and ability to work with you to obtain whatever those regulatory compliance or clearances may be, including whether or not you're importing or allowing export of your product. How long you're going to take to reach commercialization. In certain cases, you might do like what's considered a pilot test. Hey, as long as we reach commercialization in one market, selling at least X number of units by a certain date, we're on target, right? Because then you want to look for that hockey stick, right? You can't expect to be successful in all markets all at the same time right out of the gate. So you're going to kind of look at milestones as like the hockey stick approach to getting your product to commercialization, which is eventually the same scale that you'll use for seeing revenues start to be generated, right? Target for distribution, target for sales, and target for marketing. How long the contract is going to be committed for, whether you sign a 5-year deal, a 3-year deal, a 10-year deal. A lot of that is dependent on the complexity of your product and getting it to commercialization and how long that ramp up is going to take. If you know that your ramp up to getting your product to commercialization is 18 months or 24 months, you're not going to sign a 2 or 3 year deal. That's not enough time. It's not enough time for you to do anything. It's not enough time for them to do anything. So kind of take that into consideration in perspective when you're signing your licensing deal. And then think about renewals, right? So you might have an initial long-term initial term of 5 years or 10 years, and then after that, you might want a shorter period of time for a renewal period. You might want to say, okay, well, you know what, things have been great. We've been happily married for the last 10 years, but I'm getting a little antsy. Or your patent may be nearing expiration. Some of your protections may be nearing expiration, whatever the case may be. So we're going to work on 2-year commitments after that. And then let's check in every 2 years, see if we're still happy and we still like each other and we're still in love and we want to keep this thing going. It's easier at that point to kind of work through deals when you understand what your total commitment amount or term will be. And then, talking about what those opportunities to terminate are, I've listed several here. I'm not going to go through all of them. They should be fairly explanatory. But again, these are the things that you need to think about before you go into a licensing deal. Nobody likes to think about the day that they're getting married and they're standing there all beautifully dressed and friends and family all around, that this is not going to last forever, but licensing deals don't. They just don't. So I've given you some potential conditions for termination and what happens upon termination. Again, I talked a little bit about the tail end. If you've got products already in process of manufacture, products on store shelves, products ready to be sold, you want to have a mechanism for getting that inventory dispersed. You could say, I want to take possession of that. I'm going to buy it off of you, or we're going to take it as a part of the deal. all of that can be worked in, but you need to have a plan for what you're going to do with your stuff towards the end of that. So what I touched on are just some of the more complex terms, but they're probably a fairly large chunk of what goes into a licensing deal, and a lot of the components that you need to know and understand before you can create the second phase of that, which is a term sheet. A term sheet is a more simplified version of this that you would have, that gives you a better idea of what you expect from your licensee. So when you go in to start those negotiations and have those discussions, you understand your markets, you understand what your product is, what it does, where you think it can be sold, what you know about the licensee, what you think they can do for you, what you think they can do, what you think you can do with them. And so you kind of put all this together in a more simplified form, and it helps to start that negotiation and that discussion to make sure up front that you're an ideal partner, right? Nobody goes on a date without some expectation of who that person is or what they do, or whether or not that's going to be the end of the first date, or what the plans or potential are for a lifelong partner. So you kind of want to go in with the same expectation. You don't want them leading you. You need to lead that conversation, and this gives you some very, very basics to start that, of which then once you start getting into a licensing deal, there are lots of other factors to be considered that aren't represented in this document, that a licensing agent or attorney or specialist or broker will help facilitate with you. But again, these are just basics to get you started, get you thinking. If you don't have this down, if you cannot come up with this stuff on here, you're not ready for a licensing deal, and you won't be. So I want to caution you, or leave you with that caution. So I'm going to close on that for now.